I never thought a knock on my best friend's door would change the way I saw his mother, or the way she saw me. It always began with something ordinary. A house I'd been to countless times, a familiar street, the same brick pathway I used to run up when I was younger. I didn't think twice as I raised my hand to knock, not knowing that this time, she would be the one to answer. The door opened, and there she was, not my friend, not some neighbor, but his mother. For a moment I froze, my knuckles still hovering in the air like I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't. She filled the doorway with a kind of quiet poise that didn't demand attention but pulled it all the same. Her hair was loosely tied, a few strands falling around her face, as if she'd been reading and only half cared about her appearance, yet somehow, that made her more striking. The warm evening light framed her silhouette, softening her features, casting a glow that made her look both inviting and untouchable. She wasn't wearing anything extravagant, just a light cardigan over a simple top, but on her, it carried a grace that needed no effort. Before I could stumble out a greeting, she tilted her head and said, almost playfully, "You're old enough to knock, but not old enough to leave without saying hello." Her words landed with an ease that made me smile, though something about the way she looked at me lingered. It wasn't just a casual acknowledgement, it was as if she truly saw me, the grown man I was trying to be, not just the boy who used to tag along with her son. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of my posture, of how small the space between us felt. Hi. Is he home?" My voice cracked slightly, betraying nerves I didn't realize I had. She leaned against the doorframe, her book still in one hand, the corner of her mouth curving. "Not yet. He should be back soon. But since you're already here," she stepped aside, opening the door wider, "you might as well come in." The moment I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was her space. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the subtle perfume she always seemed to wear, something floral but grounded, like jasmine and cedar. I heard the faint ticking of a wall clock, the quiet hum of a kettle still warm from earlier. I followed her into the living room, my footsteps sounding too loud on the polished floor. She placed her book on the coffee table, the faintest smile tugging at her lips when she caught me glancing at the title. It wasn't some light magazine or casual novel. It was something heavy, thoughtful, the kind of book that said she had her own inner world, far deeper than what anyone might expect. "You've grown," she said casually, almost to herself. Her eyes flickered over me, not in the way someone sizes up a child's progress, but in a way that made my chest tighten. "It feels like just yesterday you boys were dragging mud across my carpet." I laughed nervously, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, I guess time doesn't wait for any of us." Her eyes softened at that, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something unspoken there. A recognition, maybe, that time had changed her too. The fine lines at the corner of her eyes, the subtle tiredness in her posture, but instead of lessening her, it gave her this aura of quiet resilience. As she moved toward the kitchen, I caught myself watching the way she carried herself. There was no rush in her step, no nervousness. She existed with a confidence that only comes from experience, and yet, underneath, there was something fragile. Something that flickered in the pauses between her words. When she returned, offering me a glass of water, her fingers brushed mine briefly. It was nothing accidental, surely, but the warmth of that contact stayed longer than it should have. We exchanged a few more words, casual, surface level. And yet, each one felt charged. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Her eyes lingered just a heartbeat too long. My chest tightened whenever she smiled. Even the silence between us seemed to hum with something I couldn't name yet. Then, from upstairs, the sound of a door creaking open broke the spell. Her son's voice calling out. The moment shifted back to normal, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But as I sat there, pretending everything was the same, I couldn't shake the thought, maybe this wasn't just another visit. Maybe tonight was the first step into something I wasn't ready for, but couldn't ignore. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed how different it felt from the rest of the house. The living room still carried the faint echoes of laughter from when my friend and I used to crash here after school, controllers in hand, pizza boxes scattered around. But the kitchen, it was hers. It smelled of freshly brewed tea and lemon polish, the kind of warm cleanliness that made you want to sit and stay a while. A kettle rested on the stove, still steaming faintly, and there were 2 cups already on the counter as though she had been expecting someone. She gestured lightly toward a chair. Sit. No use standing around like a stranger. Her tone was casual, but it carried an ease that made me feel both welcomed and slightly out of place. I obeyed, watching as she moved with practiced grace, pouring hot water over a tea bag and sliding the cup toward me. Thanks, I murmured, my fingers curling around the warm ceramic. I tried not to look at her too long, but it was impossible not to. She had this way of doing the simplest things, opening a cupboard, brushing a stray hair from her face, that felt intentional, even when it wasn't. We started with small talk. She asked about my studies, what I was planning for the future, if I was still in touch with certain friends from school. But as minutes passed, the conversation slipped into something deeper, something I hadn't expected. I told her about feeling uncertain, how at 22, I thought I'd have more figured out. About careers, relationships, life. She listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her expression soft but engaged. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, thoughtful. I used to think the same thing. That by a certain age, life would line up like dominoes, neat and perfect. But it doesn't. Sometimes it's messier than we want to admit. Her honesty caught me off guard. She wasn't giving advice from a pedestal, wasn't reciting clichés. She was speaking like someone who had lived through the mess herself. Did it get easier for you? I asked before I could stop myself. She let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, but almost wistful. Easier? No. But it did get clearer. I learned what mattered and what didn't. And sometimes, she paused, staring into her cup, what doesn't matter at all still finds a way to weigh on you. Her words hung between us, heavier than the steam curling from our cups. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I studied her face. The faint laugh lines around her mouth, the way her eyes seemed brighter when she spoke about travel, a subject that lit her up when I asked where she'd like to go if she could leave tomorrow. Florence, she said without hesitation. The art, the food, the history. It's a city that holds beauty in every crack and corner. I've always dreamed of standing on the Ponte Vecchio at sunset. Her voice softened on that last word, sunset, and I found myself picturing it. Not the bridge, not even the city, but her, standing there with the sun painting her skin gold. You should go, I said quietly. She tilted her head, studying me in a way that made my chest feel tight. And you? Where would you go if you could leave tonight? I hesitated, then shrugged. Anywhere that doesn't feel temporary. Something in her expression shifted, recognition, maybe even sadness. She reached across the counter, her fingers brushing mine briefly as she slid the sugar closer. The contact was nothing, a blink, a flicker, but it left warmth buzzing under my skin. For a few seconds, silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, more like an invisible thread between us, humming. Her eyes lingered on me just a fraction longer than necessary before she pulled back, stirring her tea with a slow, steady hand. "You're more thoughtful than most people your age. Don't lose that. The world tries to take it from you." I smiled faintly, though inside, something tugged at me, a mixture of pride and something more dangerous. Because the way she said it didn't feel like casual encouragement. It felt personal. As though she wasn't just observing me, but seeing me. The sound of a door creaking upstairs jolted us again, reminding both of us that this wasn't a suspended world. This was still her house, still her son's home. She stood, clearing her throat lightly, as though nothing had happened. "He'll be down in a minute. I'll let you two catch up." But as she turned, her hand brushed the back of my chair in the subtlest gesture, a quiet acknowledgement that the conversation had been more than idle words. And I sat there, staring into my tea, realizing that what we had shared wasn't normal. It wasn't meant to happen. And yet, it had, like a thread pulled loose from fabric, impossible to ignore once it's begun unraveling. It was one of those evenings where the weather seemed to echo something inside me. The rain had started softly, tapping against the windows like a rhythm you only noticed when the silence stretched too long. The living room felt different in that light, not the bright, noisy space of childhood sleepovers, but dim and reflective, as though the walls themselves had grown quieter with time. I sat on the edge of the sofa, trying to act casual while waiting for my friend to finish something upstairs. She sat across the room, angled in a chair near the window, the soft lamp glow brushing against her face. She had a blanket loosely draped across her lap, her arms folded, though every so often she would uncross them, as if even her body wasn't sure what it wanted to say. We weren't speaking much. That was the strange thing. It wasn't silence born of awkwardness, it was silence that meant something. The kind of silence that grows heavier the longer it lasts, as if both people are aware of an invisible line neither is willing to cross. She broke it first. Her voice was light, almost teasing, but her eyes gave her away. "You remind me too much of how curious I used to be at your age." I smiled faintly, unsure if she meant it as a compliment or a warning. "Curious how?" She tilted her head, her gaze drifting briefly toward the rain-slick glass. "Always asking questions, always searching for something more than what was in front of me. It's beautiful, in a way. But dangerous too. Curiosity makes you restless." Her words lingered in the air, settling in places I didn't know how to reach. There was something in her tone, not just nostalgia, but regret. As if she was speaking less about me and more about herself. I shifted on the couch, leaning forward slightly, elbows resting on my knees. "But isn't restlessness better than settling?" My voice came out lower than I intended, but I didn't take it back. That made her look at me, really look at me. Her eyes held mine a moment too long, as though testing whether I meant what I'd said. And in that look, I felt the balance between us shift. No longer just a boy talking to his friend's mother, but a man standing in the weight of his own thoughts. She drew in a slow breath and shook her head softly, though a faint smile tugged at her lips. You're too young to be asking questions like that. I wanted to laugh, but the truth was, it didn't feel like she thought of me as too young. Not really. Her words said one thing, but her eyes, her pauses, her hesitation, told another story. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the glass with silver lines. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, the kind of storm that felt close enough to touch but safe from behind the walls. I wondered if she felt the same way, aware of the storm building inside us both, but unwilling to step out into it. Her hand lifted to adjust the blanket, and for a brief second, her fingers brushed against the fabric of her sleeve, revealing the faintest tremble. Maybe it was the chill in the air. Or maybe it was something else. I swallowed hard, trying to anchor myself in something ordinary. My eyes flicked to the bookshelf across the room, to the muted colors of framed photos. Her son's smile from years ago stared back at me from one of them, a reminder of the line I was towing simply by sitting there. Still, the air between us refused to settle. I finally spoke, though my voice was softer now. You don't have to pretend with me, you know. About whatever it is you're thinking. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, as though she'd almost answered but thought better of it. Instead, she leaned back, her arms folding again like armor. After a long pause, she whispered, "Sometimes it's better not to say the things we're thinking. It makes life simpler." I nodded, though the knot in my chest told me I didn't agree. Simpler, maybe. But emptier too. The sound of footsteps upstairs interrupted us again, a reminder that the world outside this room still existed. She glanced toward the ceiling, then back at me, her expression carefully neutral, as though erasing what had almost been revealed. But I couldn't erase it. I carried it with me, the weight of her words, the way her voice had dropped, the way her eyes had softened when she said curiosity. The storm outside finally broke with a clap of thunder, startling us both. She laughed softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. For a second, it was as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted, however small. Something we both felt but neither dared to name. The storm outside had calmed by the time the evening deepened, leaving the house in that quiet after-rain stillness where every sound carried further than usual. My friend was still upstairs, lost in whatever had pulled him away, and that left me wandering the hallway, restless, as though the air itself was too heavy to sit in. That's when it happened. The hallway was narrow, lined with framed pictures that told stories of years I hadn't lived with them, childhood birthdays, family vacations, smiles caught in time. I was tracing them absently with my eyes when she appeared at the other end, carrying a stack of books against her chest. We both hesitated, realizing there wasn't enough space to pass without brushing close. She paused for just a second too long, then moved forward with that quiet grace she always had. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. I pressed back against the wall to give her room, though the narrow hallway didn't allow much. As she passed, the side of her arm grazed mine, just a whisper of contact, yet enough to send heat rushing through me. The warmth of her skin lingered far longer than the touch itself, and I found myself holding my breath, afraid to break the moment. One of the books slipped from her grasp then, fallen to the floor with a dull thud. Instinctively, I crouched down to grab it at the same time she did. Our hands met on the cover, fingers brushing, soft, warm, electric. When I looked up, her face was closer than it had ever been. Too close. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in something unspoken. something she wouldn't dare say out loud. The air between us thickened, heavy with everything neither of us had admitted. For a second, I thought the world had stopped. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, jasmine with something earthier beneath, grounding, comforting. Her breath was shallow, and so was mine. The book between us became an excuse for our hands to linger longer than necessary. Then, just as quickly, she pulled back, straightening with the book clutched tightly against her chest. Her cheeks carried the faintest flush, though she tried to mask it with composure. "You should be careful," she said softly, her voice low and edged with something that wasn't quite scolding. "Curiosity has consequences." The words echoed the earlier conversation, but now they meant something different. Something sharper, heavier. I rose slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "And what if I'm not afraid of the consequences?" The question left my lips before I could stop it, raw and honest. Her eyes darted to mine, startled, searching. For a moment, I thought she might answer, truly answer. But then she looked away, shaking her head almost imperceptibly. "Then you're braver than you should be." Her tone was meant to close the subject, but the way her fingers tightened around the book betrayed her. She wasn't untouched by this. She wasn't immune. I wanted to step closer, to bridge the gap, but the tension between us felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter with one wrong move. Instead, I forced myself to lean casually against the wall, masking the storm inside me with a faint smile. "You always say things that sound simple," I murmured, "but feel like they mean more." That drew her gaze back to me, and for the briefest second, her expression softened, not playful, not guarded, but vulnerable. "I suppose," she admitted quietly, "that's the danger of speaking honestly." The sound of footsteps upstairs broke the moment again, shattering the fragile bubble we'd been suspended in. She turned toward the stairs, clutching her book like a shield. I stayed where I was, the imprint of her touch still burning in my skin, her words echoing in my chest. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. And though neither of us had spoken it, I knew, and she knew, that the line between us had blurred. The night had settled over the house like a heavy blanket. Outside, the storm was gone, leaving the streets washed clean, slick with moonlight. Inside, most of the lights were dimmed, the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without thinking. My friend had retreated upstairs long ago, lost in the glow of his computer screen. That left me downstairs, and her. The living room was bathed in the soft amber glow of a single lamp, its light casting long shadows across the walls. She sat curled in the armchair, her legs drawn up slightly, a mug between her hands. I took the couch opposite her, though it felt less like distance and more like a stage we'd been placed on, two actors who hadn't agreed on what the script should be. For a while, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the clock on the wall filled the silence, steady, insistent. My eyes kept drifting toward her, the way the lamplight caught the edges of her profile, how the lines of weariness around her eyes seemed softer in this glow. She looked less like someone's mother and more like someone's story, half told and waiting to be heard. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, steady, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "Do you ever wonder if people see you the way you really are?" The question caught me off guard. I shifted, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "All the time," I admitted. "Most people see what they expect to see. Not what's actually there." She gave a small, almost sad smile, her gaze dropping to the steam rising from her mug. Exactly. It's lonely sometimes, being misread. Or not seen at all. There it was, the vulnerability she kept tucked beneath her poise. I felt the urge to cross the space between us, but instead, I let my words carry me closer. I see you, I said quietly, the words heavier than I intended. Not as someone's mom. Not as older. Just as you. Her head lifted at that, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something unguarded. For a heartbeat, she didn't respond. Then she exhaled softly, shaking her head. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? It's true. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was alive, charged. She placed her mug down on the table with slow care, as if buying time. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she said, I'm afraid of being lonely. More than I like to admit. I swallowed hard, my chest aching with the weight of her confession. You don't seem lonely. That's the trick, she replied, her lips curving faintly. People like me, we learn how to smile through it. The room felt smaller then, the air heavier. I leaned back into the couch, searching for words, but what came out wasn't rehearsed. You don't have to with me. Her eyes softened at that, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She studied me as if testing the truth of what I'd said, as though searching for cracks in my sincerity. Whatever she saw seemed to settle something in her. I don't remember moving my hand toward hers, only that when our fingers finally touched on the edge of the couch, neither of us pulled away. Her skin was warm, her grip gentle, hesitant at first, then firmer, as though she'd made a choice she couldn't undo. We sat like that, hands entwined in silence, the weight of the moment far louder than any words. The lamp flickered faintly, the clock ticked on, but all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. This isn't fair. To you, or to me. I leaned forward slightly, my thumb brushing the back of her hand. Maybe. But it's the only thing tonight that feels honest. Her eyes glistened, catching the light in a way that made it impossible to tell if she was on the edge of tears or laughter. She held my gaze, breathing shallow, her lips parting as though she might respond. But she didn't. She only squeezed my hand tighter, as if afraid that letting go would undo everything. The silence stretched on, and in that silence, something shifted. Not spoken, not defined, but undeniable. When the clock chimed softly at the top of the hour, she finally pulled her hand away, leaning back into her chair with a faint, trembling exhale. But the warmth of her touch lingered with me, as real as the shadows dancing across the room. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sounds of my friend moving somewhere upstairs. But in the living room, silence felt different, heavy, fragile, like glass waiting to crack. Her hand had only just slipped from mine, but its absence burned more than the touch itself ever had. I sat there, my palms still tingling, my chest tight. She leaned back into her chair, her arms folding across herself like armor, though the tremble in her breath gave her away. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The lamplight flickered, shadows stretching and bending, and it felt as though the whole room was holding its breath with us. Finally, she broke the silence. This isn't fair, she whispered, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Not to you. Not to me. Not to anyone. I leaned forward on the couch, my elbows on my knees, unable to look away from her. Why do you keep saying that? Fairness isn't what I feel right now. Honesty is. She shook her head, her eyes flashing with something that wasn't anger but fear. You're too young to understand what honesty costs. You think feelings are enough, but they never are. I swallowed, my throat dry. I understand more than you think. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. She looked at me, really looked, and for a second her resolve faltered. I saw it in the way her hands gripped the blanket too tightly, the way her eyes softened before she turned them away. You don't, she insisted, though her voice wavered now. You don't understand what it means to wake up tomorrow and wonder if tonight was a mistake. To feel something, and know you can't hold on to it. Her words hit me like cold water, but instead of pulling back, I stood. The space between us felt unbearable. I crossed the room slowly, every step deliberate, until I stood only a breath away. She tilted her head up, her eyes wide, her body tense like she was bracing for impact. I spoke softly, but firmly. I don't care if it's a mistake tomorrow. Right now, it feels like the only thing that's real. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world shrank to just us, her eyes locked on mine, the faint hitch of her breath, the warmth radiating from her even in her stillness. Then, almost against her will, she lifted her hand, placing it lightly on my chest. The touch was tentative, trembling, as though testing the truth of what I'd just said. My heart thudded beneath her palm, and she felt it. I know she did. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, her hand lingered there, warm and delicate, before she pulled it back abruptly as though burned. She rose quickly, putting distance between us. No, she whispered, shaking her head, her voice breaking just slightly. This can't happen. I stood frozen, the space she'd created feeling like a chasm. But it already has, I said quietly, my voice heavy. Her shoulders tensed at that, and she turned away, running a hand through her hair in frustration. You think this is simple. You think because it feels right now, it will still feel right tomorrow. But you don't know what people will say. What it will cost me. What it might cost you. I took a step toward her, my voice firmer now. I don't care what anyone else says. I care about you. She turned sharply at that, her eyes glassy, her voice rising just above a whisper. And that's what makes this so dangerous. The room fell silent again, thick with everything we couldn't say. She stood with her back partly turned, her chest rising and falling unevenly. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the distance, but I didn't. Something in her expression warned me that if I pushed further, she would retreat completely. So I stayed where I was, my hands clenched at my sides, my heart aching. The clock on the wall ticked on, each second louder than the last. Finally, she exhaled shakily, whispering almost to herself, "This isn't fair." Because I want to. And I can't. The words tore through me. There it was, the truth she had been holding back, the line she was too afraid to cross. And though it broke me, it also anchored me. Because now I knew, she felt it too. I stood there in the dim light, suspended in the space between longing and restraint, knowing we were balanced on the edge of something that could never be undone. The night had stretched itself thin, and the weight of everything unsaid still lingered in the air. I could hear the faint creak of the old house as it settled, my friends' laughter drifting from upstairs, a cruel reminder of the line between the world I lived in and the secret moment I shared here with her mother. She stood by the window now, her arms wrapped around herself as though the night air pressing against the glass could seep in. The glow from the street lamp painted her in soft gold, the strands of her hair catching light as if she were something fragile, untouchable. I sat on the couch behind her, my hands clasped tightly, afraid that if I spoke too soon, everything would crumble. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, almost trembling, but steady in its intent. "You're going to remember tonight," she said softly, her back still to me. "Maybe more than you should." I rose slowly, the floorboards groaning beneath me, and stopped just a few feet away from her. "Of course I will. Because it's real." Her shoulders lifted, then dropped with a shaky exhale. She turned to face me at last, her eyes glassy but sharp with resolve. "Real doesn't always mean right." The words cut, but I could see how much it hurt her to say them. She wasn't cold, she was protecting us both, or at least trying to. But even in her restraint, I saw the truth shining through. She had felt everything I had. I stepped closer, leaving no room for pretense. "Then tell me you don't feel it. Look me in the eye and say it's not there." Her breath caught, her lips parting as if to answer, but nothing came. Instead, her hands lifted, almost unconsciously, brushing against my arm. The touch was feather-light, tentative, but enough to set every nerve in me on fire. She lingered there a second too long, then pulled away, shaking her head. "I can't," she admitted, her voice breaking. "That's the problem." Silence followed, thick, suffocating, but charged with all the things we could never say aloud. My chest ached with the weight of it, yet I also felt a strange sense of peace. Because now I knew. She hadn't denied it. She couldn't. I nodded slowly, swallowing the ache in my throat. "Then maybe that's enough. Even if it ends here." Her eyes softened at that, something like relief flickering across her face. She reached up, hesitated, then let her hand rest against my cheek. The warmth of her palm was both comfort and goodbye, her thumb brushing lightly as though memorizing me. I leaned into it, my eyes closing for a moment, allowing myself to feel it fully. "You're good," she whispered, her voice low and trembling. "Too good. And that's why I can't let this become more than it already is." A lump rose in my throat. I wanted to protest, to fight against the wall she was putting up, but something inside me knew she was right. What we felt was undeniable, but carrying it forward would tear apart more than just the two of us. I opened my eyes, holding hers. "Then let me at least thank you. For being honest. For letting me see you tonight." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded faintly, her hand dropping from my cheek. The space where her touch had been felt colder than the night air pressing through the window. For a long moment, we just stood there, looking at each other, suspended between desire and restraint, longing and goodbye. Then, with a quiet steadiness, she stepped back. "You should go," she said gently. "Before it becomes harder than it already is." The words hollowed me out, but I obeyed. I gathered my things slowly, each motion heavier than the last. At the doorway, I turned once more. She was still by the window, her profile outlined in the glow, her arms wrapped around herself. But when our eyes met, she offered the faintest, saddest smile, a smile that said everything words could not. I smiled back, though my chest ached, and stepped out into the cool night. The door clicked shut behind me, and with it, a chapter one knew I would never forget. As I walked away, the world felt different. The street, the quiet night, the echo of my footsteps, everything seemed sharper, more alive, as though touched by her presence. I knew I couldn't have her, not in the way I wanted. But I also knew this night had left a mark on me I would carry forever. She had said I wasn't old enough to leave. Maybe she was right. Because even as I walked away, part of me stayed behind, in that living room, in her touch, in her unspoken words. And though we couldn't be together, the truth of what passed between us would remain, not a secret I regretted, but a memory I cherished, quietly, deeply, for the rest of my life.